Jay Grant, it's a real honor to have you on the Millhouse podcast today, and I'm so glad that you decided to jump in on all this and give us your life story, because I'm going to start this off by saying we know all the great permit fishermen in the world, by Dale Brown, Charlie Causey. A lot of people might not know him. Nathaniel Linville. If I'm not mistaken, you've caught, I think, 250 permit. Higher.
60.
260 permit.
I haven't fished in going on 10 years.
Out of your kayak, wading.
All but six. Six were off boat. All the rest were wading in kayak.
Do you think you're the best permit fisherman that's ever lived?
No, not hardly.
Who's the best?
I don't know and don't care, actually.
Yeah. Well, here's what's interesting. These other guys all had guides. Steve Huff, Dustin Huff,
Great guides.
Yeah. Del Perez.
Yeah.
How did you gravitate to the kayak and fishing, wade fishing?
I had no money back then at all. I wasn't working. I was fishing out of a piece of junk truck that I was sleeping in up and down the Keys. And
were you homeless?
Basically.
Sleeping out of your truck fishing?
Well, I started when I had a shop where the ferry terminal is in Customs Building in Key West now, right in the corner of the bike. The city was getting ready to come in and take it over. That used to be Singleton property. I was in one of their net storage sheds. I was doing woodwork, making jewelry boxes, doing stuff on some boats, making furniture. And, I knew the rent was going to go up, so I just left them a bunch of trash wood, and put everything in storage. And somebody had given me, somebody up in Satellite Beach, where I'm originally from, Cocoa Beach area, gave me he got me started. He didn't give me a rod and reel. Dan Gerber gave me, a good friend of Tom McGuane's, gave me an 11-weight two-piece Sage RPLX and one of those old number 3 Fenors, the one that said from 1933. And I had that rod and reel 2 days, and I caught a 21-pound permit out of Boca Chica, Point Pedophile, or whatever you want to call it. I couldn't even cast, I just flipped a little number 4 Joe Branham Merkin with blue legs, just flipped it out there twice. Fish grabbed it and took off, and
you were hooked from that point forward on permit fishing.
I kept that fish. I killed it. Nobody would ever believe that I didn't have a camera or anything. I ate it. They're edible,
sure,
but I'm not crazy about killing them.
Right.
The only ones that I've ever killed since I didn't kill them, they got sharked.
Right.
And I've only had a couple get sharked.
Right. Well, let's go, because I want to talk a lot about your permit expertise and your relationship with permit fishing out of your kayak and wade fishing. But let's go back in time. Tell me a little bit about your life story. Where do you come from? What did your parents do? How were you raised? Where were you raised? How did you get to Key West?
Well, my mom and dad were separated. Up in Virginia, my dad was stationed at Andrews Air Force Base. I think at the time he was a captain. He got transferred to McGuire in New Jersey. He worked for the Air Force and the CIA at the same time. I think he was a military courier or something like that. And he told my mom, don't sell that house, because they were getting ready to build that huge airport up there, Chantilly or wherever. And the property would go way up. She sold it anyway and moved to South Patrick there, just south of Cocoa Beach. And I fished a lot in the canals right out behind my house, throwing plugs in the morning, whatnot. There was a canal there.
So you've always been a fisherman?
I've always been involved in it since I was probably 6 or 5, here and there, when my dad, we lived in Tennessee, we lived in North Carolina, we lived in Nebraska Air Force, and Jersey, way away from the ocean. So it was, whatever I could think of to do as far as fishing goes, I did it. And I don't know.
But they also said, I talked to Nathaniel Linville, a good friend of both of ours. He said that you're just an exceptional woodworker. Was that your trade?
No, I got interested in that when I was locked up. I got in a wood shop there and read everything I could get my hands on. When I got out, I started buying tools and sharing shop space in one of Singleton's old net sheds there in the corner of the Bight by the power plant, where the power plant was. And I started building stuff, and I got interested. And then I got interested in Japanese woodwork, and started buying planes, chisels, saws that work on the pull stroke and everything. I've got a good collection of tools, and most of them that I bought were at auction from two sellers in Hokkaido, the northernmost islands in Japan. And I use My Bidder, which is a sniper app, to get those things, tricking people. They wouldn't see a showing bid, and it would go in the last 3 seconds of the thing, and I'd either beat them out or, outright. The bid goes in the last 3 seconds. If your listed bid in the sniper app is higher than the bid they leave, you hide your bid so that they can't go above you knowingly.
Very interesting.
And were you a carpenter? Would you be making cabinetry or what?
Yeah, I made cabinets. I made a lot of jewelry boxes. I made a whole bunch of coin boxes for Mel Fisher's Treasures. I was making, those with a router, cutting finger joints all day long sometimes with a little table-mounted Elu plunge router that was adjustable under the bottom, for the thing. And I rigged up jigs and stuff to enable me to do that, and they were just fast, simple, very noisy though. You have to wear a dust mask. You have to wear a set of these,
Right. Right.
I've got tinnitus really bad probably from that, from router.
Did you get down to Key West because your father came down here from the Naval base?
He never came here. My mother and father got divorced after he went to McGuire. She didn't want to move, so she said, "To hell with it." She came down here to, South Patrick, which is just south of Cocoa Beach.
Well, I want to ask you how you got to...
A couple blocks from the beach we lived,
I want to ask you how you got to Key West, but before I want to go there, you mentioned that when you got locked up, that's how you learned how to do all your woodworking stuff.
I'm going to be truthful with you. I came down here because I had warrants up there.
So you're hiding?
Well, basically, yeah. I tell people...
Like a lot of people in Key West back in the day.
I tell people today that when I came to Key West, I had $70 in my pocket. I hitchhiked. And when I break even, I'm leaving, because Key West to me anymore ain't Key West, It's
Right.
Nothing like it was back then.
So you came down to hide?
Not really, but I just didn't want to be up there. I was getting in trouble all the time,
Would you get in
I had
trouble
a serious
for?
drug problem, I had a heroin addiction, was doing a lot of alcohol, drinking. If I didn't have the money for drugs, I was drinking, beg, borrow, steal,
And that's how you end up getting locked up, going to prison?
Yeah, the last time. That was in '87. I haven't touched anything since then.
Right, good for you. Who taught you how to do the woodworking while you were in prison?
Nobody. Taught myself.
Through books and stuff like that?
The only thing we made when I was in there was 2x4 frames for target silhouettes for the gun range there for the the correctional officers.
Right.
That's the only thing we did in there. But yeah, I just got interested, and I lived under Stephen Palomini. Wanted me to do some work on his house, and I stayed under his house in Ramrod, next key up, and I stayed there for like 4 years, and I got back into it. Mm-hmm. So that's when I started buying tools again. I'd gotten rid of everything in order to fly fish for years.
How did you get clean in prison? Was there a program there to help you get off the heroin and the drugs?
Well, you don't have any money there, and the drugs were there. The correctional officers were bringing drugs in. Visitors were bringing them in. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I mean, that was the last time. There had been times before that. I was sick and tired of, so as they say, being sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Right.
The party was over. I knew exactly. I went to AA meetings. Set up chairs, passed out literature.
How old are you at this time?
I was 40, I think.
So let me just ask you a question. So if you're an addict in prison and the guards were bringing in drugs, how would you purchase those drugs? Was it all bargaining?
Through inmates. I mean, that's stuff that they have trusted. There's guards there that know people who are incarcerated that they grew up with. It's Miami. This was Florida City where I was, Dade Correctional. And there were, a lot of guards, black, white, Hispanic. Some of them probably grew up in Liberty City or Opelika or someplace, which is heavy crime places. And they became prison guards, because they were tired of it, and they wanted an income and,
So you went to prison actually a couple of times you were mentioning.
Yeah. First time was in 68.
And what was that from? What did you do to get put
68 was possession of pot. I got 3 years, and I went to Belglade.
And the second time?
Second time was violated parole.
Right. Okay.
Third time was violated parole. Again, the last time was stole a gold chain out of a jewelry store in Key West.
Right. Do you remember the time, wherever it was, and when was it, that you thought, I am done. I'm done with this lifestyle. I'm going to be clean. I want to change my life.
Last time I got arrested. My best thinking put me in that position, And I'd been to treatment in Miami, in a concept house for, I don't know how long I was there, 6 months, 9 months. Got in the second phase, and I could work down the street. The Miami Jewish Home was framing drywall and making money to pay client fees and whatnot. And then I went to a 3/4 way house after that. Bought a new 900 Honda Super Sport from working. I was having to take a bus back and forth to work way out in Sweetwater,
right,
the other side of the airport. And I just toughed it out,
Right.
Can you imagine going to prison for 3 years for possession of marijuana?
If I told you how much, it was 5/8 of an ounce of crappy Mexican sugar weed.
And now it's legal. That's
Mexican. Took me 7 years.
Mexican.
Took me 7 years to get rid of that 3, to get it off of paper, off of parole and everything.
Mexican sugar weed.
And I still didn't learn.
Yeah.
Addiction is a powerful thing,
Either
alcohol or drugs,
If somebody's listening that might have that issue with their children or themselves, what would you best say to them to help them change their lives?
Just do what you got to do one day at a time, not to pick up anything. That's it,
It's a minute to minute.
And
day
all
to day.
these people that say, well, I can't handle those meetings and this and that. I don't go to meetings anymore, but I went religiously for 4 years.
How hard is it now to stay clean? Is it always a conscious thought in the back of your mind?
No.
It's not.
You're done now.
I've had, the closest I've come to anything is we went fishing down in Cosgrove one time, with chum and herring, for yellowtail and whatnot. I caught a blackfin tuna on a chunk of herring. And that was the only real fish that we caught down there, and I gave it to those guys that I was with. It was a friend from up in Bonita Springs and stuff. These guys were cabinet makers up there. And they wanted something to eat that night, so I gave them that tuna. And hell, it was his boat. It didn't cost me anything to go. But somebody had set a beer down, and I had a soda down there. And I just grabbed a can, and I immediately tasted beer, and spit it out. And that's the closest I've come.
Wow, good for you.
Other than dreams. In dreams, I've done this,
In dreams?
In dreams. Very scary.
And when you wake up, what do you think?
Might be time to go to meetings again because I'm lacking spiritually or whatever. I don't have the spiritual power to shield me anymore,
Wow.
Don't know. I mean,
well, congratulations on making your life better from that abyss that you were in. How did you get to Key West?
He just told you.
Well, I mean, and right, you hitchhiked down with $70 in your pocket.
First time I didn't have any 70, I might have had 70 cents.
Right.
I went back up one time. I think I bought a 6-pack at Jack's or something. Went back across the street and drank them with my thumb out. And some people picked me up. They dropped me off in Boynton on 95 in Boynton, and I could hear these Haitian guys yelling and screaming on the other side of the fence on 95. You know, it was like 1 or 2 in the morning. There was a broke down truck on semi on the on ramp. It was off the side of the road. I crawled up in it and went to sleep for a couple hours. Got back up, and somebody gave me a ride up to Sebastian. But I got just all kinds of crazy stories, you know, about that kind of stuff, and it's
right.
You know.
Well, I think our story today is you know, the evolution of your life, you know, from where you came from, and obviously your kayak fishing and how great of a permit fisherman you became. But you did mention here a little bit ago you were living in your truck. You were semi-homeless. Trucks.
I was the last owner of any truck that I ever owned.
Because no one wanted to buy one after you.
Wet kayaks on top, dripping salt all over them. The rain drains would go. I had a van, a Toyota van, an older kind, the forerunner to the Previa or whatever van. And I could actually lay in the back of it on a mattress and see the moon up through the roof of it. You know, it was just, but, you know.
So during the height of your fishing days, would you fish every day?
Every day.
Every day.
Weather permitting, you know, sometimes it got so bad. Here's what I started doing. I went and bought a bow saw. I went back in, you know, where there's a Winn-Dixie up on Key Largo. And there's some property across the street. Now, I think Dink Bruce, that lived in Key West, might have owned that property.
Yeah, Gink is the guy that Tom McGuane and those guys were talking about.
You know, he passed away.
Gink did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know his story that well, but actually, Carl Hyacin wrote a book, and I think it was, wasn't it Gink that he spoke about in one of his books? But Gink was a big guy that hung out with McGuane and Harrison and those guys, if I'm not mistaken.
Probably. Dink was a little guy, though. I mean, he was a little guy. He owned a killer piece of property on the corner of Southern and Simonton Street. Two houses there. They're both just huge conch houses, old. His dad was Hemingway's. Dink had met Hemingway, and Dink's dad had to drive Hemingway to Idaho because Hemingway, they wouldn't put him on a plane because he was so drunk, you know. So Dink's dad, Toby Bruce, would drive him to Idaho, you know, so that he could get sober. And I guess the last time he didn't bother getting sober, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dink passed away a couple of years ago.
Right. So how many years did you live out of your trucks, you say, with a kayak on top, fishing for permit?
Well, let me think. I caught my first permit in 2004. 94, excuse me. 94. Then the following year, I realized I can't wade these channels, you know, so I'm going to have to get a kayak. So I got a kayak. And I sold off tools that I had in storage for that, you know, in order to buy a kayak. And then I could range out with the kayak. I paddled all the way from Valois Street up in Key Largo, you know, up Card Sound Road, paddled all the way from there up to not to Ocean Reef, but to that place that Hyacin got closed off up there, Carysfort Yacht Club. I paddled all the way up there and back in the day. You know, I haven't fished there in years.
So your paddle board was all with
kayak, no paddle.
I mean kayak, but there was no foot things that help generate speed. All with your arms.
Yeah, a lot of those things come with that. I throw them away. And my whole thing with the kayak is simple, easy, no clutter. I don't sit down in the butt well. I sit back up behind it. And if you want to get a little bit of extra height so that you can see out better, just a few inches, you put a floating cushion up there and then you lash that off with a bungee across the hatches. I cross my legs in the butt well. There's a compass holder or a cup holder molded into the fiberglass between the leg slots. And I put a washcloth or just an old T-shirt or something on that. And I set my reel down in that, handle down, so it can't move around. And then I use a plastic-coated anchor chain on the front hatch coiled up. And I strip all the line out, in front of that cup holder. And strip all my line out that I'm going to need for a cast. I'll test it to see if I've got it right. And then I lay the rod between those plastic-coated links on the chain. So it's ready to go. I can just stop the kayak, lay the paddle down across my legs or put it in the water on a bungee and get a foot over. I fish just shallow water. You wouldn't believe it.
So you weren't fishing just Key West. You were fishing
everywhere.
From Key Largo to Key West.
Best bone fishing I've ever done was Shell Key. Had good bonefish, big,
yeah, for
slobs.
Sure.
The bottom side of Lignavite Key, across the channel over there on the other side of the swash.
Right.
The swash is a motor zone. You're allowed to run your engine there. That place is notorious. I've seen videos of Sandy Moret and Pallet on a boat there before, and I think line class records have been caught there, but. The basin on the other side of that is no motor, and there's a bunch of PVC pipes sticking up. They put T's on top of them so that the cormorants can get on there. They've sprigged all that bottom where the boats have tore it up, and they want the cormorants, to defecate in the water. It fertilizes that turtle grass.
Right. So the grass grows back.
Well, I've seen them out there. They're using a pontoon boat, a deck boat. They have barrels full of the turtle grass chunks in there, that they picked from someplace, and they got girls and everything out there. They make I don't know who these people are.
Habitat restoration. There you go.
So the cormorant poop,
yeah,
really
fertilizes the
well,
prop
you'll see
scars.
them when you see.
So if you see prop scars, you'll see a lot of the T stakes.
Well,
where all these birds can land.
How have I never known that?
We don't fish there that much, but they're
crazy.
There.
Yeah, and at first I started wondering why are these T stakes on there. Until I started seeing the birds on them, and I watched them take a dump on there. Plenty of times. I used to put my kayak in on Indian Key Fill and paddle over there to the bottom side. That's no motor. The south side of Lignavite.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had days out there where I didn't catch any fish under 9 pounds.
I know. I mean, and this is up until 2010 when the freeze got and killed all the big ones.
Well, I don't know about that. I think it stopped before that. I think it stopped Rita, another hurricane, and then Wilma came through, and it churned that bay up so bad that it killed all the sponges. It clogged them up, and then this blue algae took over. And what happened with the sponges is that algae, that blue algae outcompeted the algae that the sponge uses, for food. They're filter feeders. And this was explained to me by a guy, Dr. Metz. He's a PhD in microbiology. He's over in Thailand now. I fished with him for some years. He said the guy told him that the blue algae was so small that it would go right through the sponges. They couldn't feed on it, and that stuff ate everything out of the water that the good algae was supposed to be eating,
Right.
And it stayed like that for a long time. I don't know how long, but even then, a year later or 2 years later, I was still catching fish over there adjacent to the swash, just big schools. I call it the middle ground. It's a no motor, and that's the bottom end of the Peterson Bank, which goes all the way up to Barnes Key. Actually, it goes all the way up to. There's a place called up there.
That's where I was telling you, Nikki, where we were talking about the tarpon fishing there, and that's where a lot of tarpon hang out
on the west.
Exactly right.
I'm trying to think, what is that bank called? That's a Buchanan Bank.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you take your kayak back that far?
I didn't go to the Buchanan. I don't fish tarpon out of it. Fishing tarpon out of a kayak, I'm going to tell you.
You get towed around.
People do. Well, it ain't towed around. I mean, you get them. If you want your fly back and you don't want to just break the fish off and let him wear the fly, one of those things that they can get you. I mean, it's not that easy getting back on a kayak, especially if your rod's on the bottom and whatnot. And yeah, they'll tow you into deeper water. I've had permit tow me into channels where I've had to drag my legs in the water. You can't paddle, you know. You got both hands. You're palming the reel or pinching the edge of the spool, you know, for drag. And he's taking you out with the current, and you can't let them continue to do that. You know, they'll be out in the Gulf.
Yeah, you won't be able to get
you
home.
Drag your legs, and it slows them down, and that way you can get up to them. What happens basically when you're reeling one in, you think you're reeling him in, but you're not. You're just reeling yourself to him.
Right.
You know, and then you get up on him, and he bolts again. You know, and they're getting their breath in between. You know?
Could you drop your anchor at any point?
I didn't use an anchor. I had that short painter with. I fish shallow. You know, I would hook these things shallow, but they'd run off in the channel. And if I want them, I'm gonna have to go with them. You know.
What's the biggest fish you ever caught out of your kayak?
Can't say for sure, but I couldn't get it in the kayak, and there was this much room between the tips on the tail, and that was it. And I saw that fish coming in.
And you're talking about a permit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That fish coming in, it was a big one, and I saw it lift its dorsal like this, and I'm going. The tip of its tail was back here, and I'm going, holy shit! And I tossed back then I was tying my flies different. I didn't use any splayed hackle on my crabs. I didn't use any legs. I just used, Aunt Lydia's sparkle yarn, and they were heavier flies, and they were bigger. They were the size of a quarter. And I flipped one of those out in front of him, and just immediately saw him do this, and it grabbed it. And I strip struck this fish, just felt him moving with it, strip struck him, and then I sweep struck him, with the rod to try and get that thing into here. I don't like hooking him in the tongue. God, it just makes me cringe. You get one in, you see him, you got that, he's got a number 2 hook in his tongue or whatever. But this fish took off. I was out of the kayak when I hooked him. I got in the kayak because there was a whole bunch of ghost traps on the bottom out there, crawfish and stone crab. And I didn't want him getting dragging my fly line through there because I didn't have an extra rod with me. So he towed me and just kept towing me and towing me. I put my feet in, and I'm going, I don't know if that place is real sharky. Bull sharks, they have their pups there, there's hammerheads there after the tarpon and the permit. And he towed me, and he got to the first batch of patch reef offshore there, which is an easy quarter mile, between a quarter and a half maybe. And these things get shallow enough where you can see waves breaking on them and probably hit them, with a big outboard, on a real low. These super negative tides. We had tides last week that were 6 inches below mean low. That's shallow,
Right.
But he got me out there, and I'm going, I got to do something with this fish. I can't just let it continue. And I was pulling myself up to it, and it would take off again. And it was actually being real casual, and I got it up there, and then finally, I'm trying to crank on it, and I can't do anything with it. And I said, the thing has gotten around something. So I kept reeling myself up. I look on the bottom, the fish is laying on its side like this, and there's like a 5 or 6 foot, like a sea fan there. I didn't know which way it had gone around that, but I know it wasn't moving, and I wasn't able to lift the fish. So I just guessed. I just went over on the one side, with the rod tip, put it out and lifted, and I saw the head come up, and then the fish started back out again, and I was probably another 8 minutes with it or something like that. All total, I was over a half an hour with that fish. And because, I just wasn't really doing anything to it because it was having its way with me,
Sure.
Towing the kayak. But I got it in, and I tried to tail it. It took off again, and got it in. I grabbed the tail, and I tried to get it up. And I'm not going to flip my kayak out there, especially after that, because that attracts things, And dragging your legs is not probably not the greatest idea either, you know. But that fish, I would guess, Nathaniel's asked me how big it was, and you know, if I had to guess, I'd say it was a good 35 pounds.
Wow.
You know, and could have been more than that.
What's your biggest bonefish you caught over there by Shell Key and the Islamorada area?
I don't know. I never weighed any. I didn't even have a camera back then. I got a camera and I got some good pictures. After that, those little paper throwaway film cameras. Mm-hmm. That's what I started using. And then Stevie and his wife at the time, Melissa, bought me a Nikon point and shoot. And I ended up drowning that. And the biggest bonefish was big.
Yeah, I mean, the kayak
13, 12, 13, right. 14 pounds. I got one down here that was that big, and that was in the Keys, back up in the Chain Lakes.
Sure.
One morning.
What is it about the permit that you love so much?
I don't know. They just they're fun to watch when they're feeding and stuff. They're real fun to watch. They don't really belong in water that shallow, you know, and they're just amazing creatures, you know. They're more like wild sheep or something, hogs, you know. They're in there, they're rooting and stuff. Somebody tried to tell me that permit don't mud. I watched them do it. I've also watched them swim with sharks along with jacks, and they're a challenge for sure.
And so after a day of permit fishing, you say you caught 2. Would you go back and log those numbers? Where did the 260 come from? Or is that in your head? Or
no, I should have brought that book with me. I've got a composition book that has all that stuff. My girlfriend, before she passed away, she died of pancreatic cancer in 2017. She kept the last, I don't know how many that I caught, 10 or 12. I quit fishing basically in 2014.
Why?
Well, because I was on the phone with her. She was up in New York, and I was trying to get her to come down. She wanted to come down, but she was married, and her husband was a POS. She ended up coming, and but for a year there, I just talked to her on the phone mostly. I went to the Marquesas one time for a week and a half with my sailboat in a kayak, and I caught fish down there. When I got back in phone range, I would say maybe Ballast Key or you know, Joe Ingram or whatever. I talked to her on the phone, and she was crying. You know, she said that she was wanting to call the Coast Guard. She told her she was living with her husband up in Long Island, and she asked him, I want to call the Coast Guard, and he says, nah, Jay's a big boy. Don't worry about it, you know.
How long were you gone for in the Marquesas?
Week and a half. I've stayed as long as 2 weeks. I couldn't do it when she came. That's one of the reasons that I had to quit, you know. Mm-hmm. You drink twice as much water. She used water to cook with. You know, she cooked a lot. You know, that's where I really started gaining weight. When I first met Nathaniel in, I think it was 2008, something like that, it was the same year or the year after he opened the store, the Angling Company. You could barely pinch me. I had hardly any body fat.
Did guiding ever come into the question, or you always opposed to
I did that off a friend's super skiff for a couple of years and just piecemeal here and there. No license, you know, no insurance.
What was it like being in an actual boat?
Here's the thing with guys.
That's a good question.
You went from a kayak to a boat. You must have said, oh my God, this is awesome.
It's a yacht.
I look at it this way. Here's the thing with guides. I've got a whole lot more experience than probably 90%. I know I've caught way more fish than most of them. There's some good ones, don't get me wrong.
Right.
You're a guide when you say you're a guide.
Right. You haven't earned.
I was guiding people out of kayaks up in Islamorada. That's one of the ways I lived, you know. If I wasn't fishing, I was taking people fishing.
And that's how you make your money to stay alive.
I was sure it was just stupid money. You know, $70 for a day. They'd have to rent their own kayak right there at Lignavite Channel, you know, Robbie's or whatever. And then I don't know. I just didn't like fishing with any of those people. There was a couple people, nice people that I fished with that.
I have a feeling you don't like to be around people.
Well, I've got some super great friends that are really good to me. Nathaniel and
Right.
Kat are
But you've
two other than Jeannie and Trevor Gregg. Holy mackerel, man! Those people, they treat me like a son, and I'm older than both of them.
right, because I personally I find that when you're on the water and around fishing, very few people relate to how you think and how you live in the Keys. And a lot of times for me, I just go into my mind just gets like focused on doing the things I want to do. And I could see you that a lot of people might not even understand you and how you live out of your truck and in a kayak, etc. And you cherish your friends, but you don't have a whole lot of them.
Yeah. Let me get back to how I was living. I mentioned the Winn-Dixie up there. As you get up towards, I think you can even see Car Sound Cutoff as you're going north on one. Across there's a hardwood hammock across the street. I went back in there one time just to look around because I'm a woodworker, and I've milled lumber with a Wood-Mizer band mill before, mahogany and woman's tongue and blue maho, bunch of stuff, And I went back in there to look for these old deadfall Jamaica dogwood logs. They'd been down for century at least, and had lichen growing on them and everything. And I'm going, how to get these things out of here? They're super heavy, just really dense, beautiful wood inside. So I went to the hardware store back to the south by Waldorf, what they call Waldorf Plaza down there, and right in the heart of Key Largo. There's a hardware store down that way. I got a bow saw and an extra blade, and I went back. And while nobody was looking, I creeped across the street and went back in there, and I found these logs. There were quite a few of them. And I knew the length on my pickup bed. I had an old Mazda there for a couple of years, and I would cut those things where they would fit in the bed. And I'd cut them, and then when I get done with one, I'd roll it out by the road. And I didn't have a GPS. I needed a handheld to do it, but I didn't. You can't even hear where the traffic's coming from back in there because it's so dense that it baffles the sound of the highway, And I'd roll those things out by the bike path there, northbound lane, and I'd put something in a tree, like somebody's piece of trash to mark it, and then I'd go get some more, and I'd roll them end over end. These things weighed over 200 pounds a piece, end over end, pick up one end.
Sure.
I go out and I kept my truck parked over at Winn-Dixie parking lot, When I get done, I'd go over there. It'd still be light out. I'd go over there, get something to eat, sit in the truck, listen to a baseball game or listen to the Marlins or whatnot. Then when it get dark, I'd go back over there and I'd drive across the bike path and my lights would shine on. I remember one time I had a paper plate stuck up on a branch, and that's where those were. And I would put them in there. I'd bring them all the way back to Key West, put them in my storage unit on Stock Island, and I would sell those things off to other woodworkers, and that would pay for the storage unit,
Sure.
give me gas money. And if I did that enough, it would give me money for a new rod and reel and whatnot. I wasn't on any guide programs in there or anything, so. I finagled my way into a Van Staal guide program, and Scott gave me an 11-weight two-piece. I've got one of your reels on there, that big number 3 Fortuna.
Mm-hmm.
I've got it on there. Should be using it right now because that's what it's for, for
Right.
big tarpon. But you need a boat to do that. I'm not going to do it out of kayak. Just refuse to do it.
Right. Let's get back to the permit fishing for a second. Were they pretty obvious to you when they get in a mode where they're catchable versus when they're at a certain state where they're uncatchable?
When you see bunches of them, especially the smaller ones, in water this deep, and you see them doing cartwheels with their tail, what they've done is they've grabbed something, possibly spider crabs, or maybe a clam or something like that, and they're going at the same momentum as the other fish. they'll grab a hold of something, and that momentum carries their tail up and all the way over. They're doing cartwheels. I've watched them do that many times, right there at ballast. And I haven't seen it.
A full cartwheel all the way over, a full 360 degrees.
No, 180.
So they just go down
they're
and right
going
back
this
up.
way. They're going this way, and then they've grabbed something, and they come over like this. You know how their eyes are.
They'd flip all the way over.
Any permit that you look at, his eyes are always pointing towards the end of his nose.
Right.
I mean, their eyes don't look off to the side. They're always looking this way.
So
I don't know if that's because they're in a certain mode or if that's just how they are. I'm tended to believe that that's just how they are, you know.
So they'd nose down, feed, and the head would go all the way,
The tail would come all the way over.
And then at that point, what would happen? How would they get realigned to keep going forward?
Evidently, he'd grab what he had. And sometimes you'll see him slap. You know, sometimes you'll see him just slap the water. And what that does is that gives them purchase to pull something loose, you know, that tail. The tail pushes a bunch of water. Yeah, they can't back up.
Right.
You know, they don't swim back. I imagine they could back up a little bit with their pectorals or whatever. But with that tail, what that tail does is that gives them the enough oomph to give them purchase against whatever it is they're trying to get loose.
What was your best day of permit fishing, if you have one?
I think the best I've ever done was probably 3 or 4. I can't remember, East Content. They were all small. Then I got one in farther by Key, if you know where that is. That's off that harbor channel that runs down between Howe Key and the Water Keys, Big Torch. It goes down and it dead ends. That's a deep place. That's like a major interstate or whatever, you know, for all kinds of things. There's cobia in there, you know, there's... Mm-hmm.
Did you ever get in trouble with your kayak with weather and current or tides?
Or other guides?
Well, yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I want to hear this one.
I parked on the very upper end of Big Torch one afternoon. And there were some people that lived in that house then. That road comes around and it goes down and it just dead ends. Now, you can launch a kayak there. But there's a big house on the water there. And they had horses there. Those horses ended up dying of encephalitis. Anyway, I parked there and I paddled out and I just kept paddling. I had water down inside the kayak. I had some food. I had a jungle hammock. No, I didn't have my jungle hammock at the time. There's a key off of West Contents back in towards the key that had the monkeys on it, Raccoon Key. There's a strip bank that runs from this little mangrove island. That's denuded now. It used to be just lush. And one of the hurricanes or a tornado got it and just stripped all the leaves and branches. But that's called Key. And that strip bank runs all the way over to the western end of West Content.
Right.
And
you know where that is.
Right. We're gonna bleep some stuff out just so people we don't.
It's okay. It's okay.
I paddled around. Yeah, if you know these spots and you don't want anybody knowing for sure, bleep it, man. I don't.
No, but this is very interesting.
I got to tell you.
This is good. This is good.
Yeah, I don't want you thinking I'm making this shit up.
No, I don't.
Anyhow, I paddle around. The worst mosquitoes you can imagine. The water keys. And the contents aren't much better, but the water keys above Big Torch, that's the worst. Other than Key Largo is incredibly bad mosquitoes. I paddled until I couldn't paddle anymore. And I got up near Little Crane Key and I could hear all these cormorants. That was a rookery. I could hear them all up there, you know, 2 o'clock in the morning. I said, fuck it. I went out on the strip bank and the tide had fell. Shoved my kayak down through the mud. You know, it's a kind of crushed shell aggregate, you know, limestone mud, crushed shell clay with some grass on it. I poked it down in and I wrapped the chain around it. A storm came And I mean, that was probably the most frightened I've ever been in my adult life. There was lightning bouncing off the water, and I didn't know if I was gonna. I can't remember if I prayed or not, but it was real hairy. And this went on for 15 minutes, maybe longer. And wind picked up. The wind was. I had this old Navy thing, like a poncho over me, and that was probably a Second World War poncho or something like that, and it just got shredded. And next morning I woke up. It was already light out. I had that thing over me, what was left of it, and I'm laying in the bottom of the kayak. That's how I was sleeping. This was an ocean kayak, Scupper Pro, and turned around backwards with my feet back towards the seat. And the thing in between the feet goes up on an angle like this, and that was enough support for my back. I took the floating cushion and put it behind my head, and it was actually, I could sleep. It was comfortable, you know. And I guess that, you know, once that thing got over with, I was able to go to sleep. The next morning, I had that thing over my head, and I heard this splish, sploosh, sploosh. I took that thing off my head, and I looked over. There were bonefish tailing next. See where that chair is right there? They were all up and down that bank, just tailing their ass off. And I had a box full of merkins that I tied, and some bonefish patterns, you know, like Borsky craft shrimp or whatever. And that box had fell out of my shirt pocket in the water one time, and I didn't rinse it good enough. And the ribbing caused those. I didn't have money for gamakatsu or
Good hooks.
Yeah, good hooks. I like the other hooks better. I mean, if you lose one, if you break a fish off, you know, it'll rot out pretty quick.
Sure.
Those things rotted out in the thing. The hooks were breaking off. But, you know, I don't even know if I caught one of those fish, and I should have caught 10. My best day bone fishing was in that spot over there adjacent to the swash. And I probably got 14 fish one morning, one right after another. There was a guy on the other side, on the west side of that thing. There's a bank over there, and I forget what they call it. I think they call it Metacumby Basin or something over there on lower Metacumby. He was in a boat like a Hughes or something. Had a guy on the front of it, and I was getting these bonefish. They were coming around in a circle. I was hooking them one right after another, and I had the same problem. My hooks were breaking, and I had a couple of good flies, and I used them as long as I could, you know, before I lost them. And I wasn't, you know, checking knots or anything, you know. I heard the guy tell the guy on the front of his boat, they weren't doing anything. He was just staked there waiting for fish to come down the Peterson, you know, to the south. And he was telling the guy kept turning around and looking at me. These bonefish were big. You know how they get up on top and they lunge? And it looks like a series of hand grenades going off.
Blowing mud up as they run off the flat?
Well, they were in some deeper water. They were in the basin, and I was up on the edge of it, you know. And this guy was telling the guy, watch in front of you, watch in front of you. Those are barracuda. He was telling the guy on the front of the thing that they're barracuda. Finally, after about the fifth or sixth one that I got, that got cranked, and he went way up, you know, by the wheel ditches there, cut through the Peterson there, you know. And it was funny.
Any confrontations
I remember that like it was yesterday.
Any confrontations on the water with other guides?
Here we go. Oh yeah, I've told people about their wives, everything.
What would typically happen?
What?
When you'd have a confrontation with a guide?
Well, anymore, if you mess with somebody my age, you're going to jail. So I can, you know, pretty much get away with murder. Not that I want to. But I pretty much, if you know, I've had people cut me off in boats because I'm in a kayak and they know I can't get up there and do anything about it.
Right.
But I can definitely outrun them with a kayak if they're poling. You know.
Would you be polite at first, or would you go straight into the?
I'd go straight at them, just depending on how bad a transgression it was. You know. I mean, I don't own anything out there, but they sure as hell don't either, you know.
Right.
And most of them, I'm from here. Most of them aren't, you know. And I don't care how long they've been here, you know. They say that Well, I live in Key West. I've told them, motherfucker, get off my island, stuff like that, Show some respect.
Right. I think that's the most important thing because they know what they're doing. It's not that they're idiots, if you're on a flat,
Jay,
cutting you off.
another question I have for you is, would you ever go out in the middle of the night on a full moon and target permit and bonefish? Can you see pretty well on a full moon at night?
You know who did that, though? I was reading, and I think at Florida Sportsman some years ago, Bill Curtis in Miami started doing that, taking people on night trips off of Biscayne. You get big old patches of sand bottom, and he would chum out there on the bottom. And he said, you can see these black shapes come off the grass, onto these things. And he said that he'd be staked, or anchored or whatever.
But you never
they'd throw shrimp at him. No,
right.
Well, I've never done it. I know they feed at night because in the mornings wading, I used to take my kayak, but I'd get out of it and wade at some places on the south side where those places had good fish, larger permit, to 25 pounds, 20, 25 pounds. Small ones were 14 and lots of them. And they were the readiest eaters. You wouldn't believe anything. I was using those stupid fake merkins, with no splay, no legs, just basic brown. I like, in low light, I like a darker one. In higher light, I like a lighter one, tan. Or I would variegate them, I would put a brown and a white, brown and white, brown and tan, whatever for during the day, depending on whether there's grass or whatever, situational stuff.
Were you going back and tying flies in various colors and sizes? And could you not sleep about permit, or were you just
I hate tying flies. I tied my truck up there on Craig Key by the Channel 2 bridge. I would stay there on one side or the other. I would stay there and I would tie flies. I had an old Herder solid cast iron vise. I had that thing on my steering wheel on a, whatever truck I was in it, whatever piece of junk I was in at the time. I had a tackle box next to me with a bunch of eyes, bobbin threads and material down the bottom of it, just smashed down in. I have to go down in there for the crystal flash, and for the hackle and whatnot. And I was tying these little merkins like the ones that I told you about, no legs, no hackle, just Aunt Lydia's. And what I'd do is I would paint those with clear Wet n Wild fingernail overlay. And once they stiffened up, I would barber them into the shape I wanted them. Small eyes, and I was doing those on number 6 hook. And I had another fly I called it the Psycho Bunny, and that was a zonker strip with real small bead chain eyes on number 6 hooks. And those are deadly bonefish patterns for these bonefish.
Right.
They didn't make any noise hitting in the water. You could drop it on their nose when their eyes were this far below the grass. Like out at Barnes at night, there's just some monster fish out there, and just huge rooters. And Twin Keys Bank used to be like that.
Right. So you would focus a lot of your fishing during the low light hours, early morning or later evening.
I think those are the best, don't you?
Yeah, for sure.
But permit, the thing with permit though is they'll school and eat in the daytime, but it just seems like they don't. I don't know if it's because they see better.
Harder to catch for sure.
Yeah. And because they can hear boat traffic from here to Big Pine. They can hear a boat that far away.
Right.
They know to be. The place is beat now, Andy. It's beat. There's just too many. I call them parachute guides. They're from God knows where. They just fall out of a plane on the place or whatever because it's money.
Right. Well, I think there's been a lot of interesting research that's been founded by scientists for BTT, and that's why they closed the Western Dry Rocks, because a lot of the light tackle guys were targeting permit out there and losing 50% of their catches to sharks.
That's been closed forever, huh?
No, they just closed it a year ago.
What, Western?
Western Dry Rocks. They closed it.
I'm talking about Sambo's.
Yeah, Western Dry Rocks. So now I've been hearing about this year, 2023, that the permit fishing is really lacking the numbers, the biomass, and they're waiting to see what kind of numbers come back from the spawn off the Western Dry Rocks area.
Who was it that was taking these fish?
A lot of the light tackle guys are out there catching them when they're out there spawning,
Yeah.
and they're losing 50% of the permit to sharks.
I think it's predation, Jay. I don't think
Predation to sharks.
yeah, it's not they're not killing them.
Well, there were people in Marathon that were harvesting permit for commercially. You know, I saw them doing that. I saw them doing that way up off a 7 Mile Bridge at East Bahia Honda Key. Mm-hmm. There's a strip bank below there, and I saw them, you know, fishing crabs there, 2 at a time.
Yeah. Well, you've got a fascinating story for sure. Living out of a truck with kayaks,
Trucks, and then a van, just all junk.
What's your life like now? You don't fish for permit much anymore, right?
I don't fish for them at all.
Yeah.
Unless somebody offers to take me. You know, I'm not. I got the houseboat now. And that's a 2-edged sword. It's a lot more comfortable than living in that little 26 McGregor sailboat. What I need to do is I need to start getting stuff out of the houseboat. I emptied the McGregor. I emptied everything out of that to clean it up when I was in storage. I moved back in it. I had the boat up on the hill and did the bottom paint and everything. Took everything out, took a bunch of stuff up to Big Pine to storage. Can't afford a storage unit in Key West.
Right.
I can rent houses up the road for what they want for a storage unit in Key West, or rent a trailer or something, whatever. Just all I care about really is a roof over my head, and I don't give a damn
where it is.
Yeah. And before we got started on the podcast, you mentioned theft was very prevalent.
Out on the water. They're stealing gas out of people's dinghies. They're stealing basically anything that's not nailed down. They're taking boat engines.
And who are these people?
Bad people.
But other people that live on the sailboats?
A lot of the smaller engines, to be truthful with you, I think that a lot of the smaller engines, that people don't take care of their stuff down there. They won't tilt an engine up, you know. Crud grows in the intake on it. They burn those engines up, you know, because of the stuff that's growing. They keep them at the dinghy dock, the ones that are on the mooring field. They keep them at the dinghy dock. The intakes get clogged. You know, they quit pissing. The people let them go. I just put an impeller in my 40 because it had given up.
Yeah.
But yeah, those people. I understand that there are like meth labs out there. I mean, I don't know. You might not want to include that.
Well,
but there's people making methamphetamine out there.
Yeah.
On the water.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of people that are on it. You can look at them and tell, talk to them and tell. You know, they're just they're tweakers.
Mm-hmm. Right. What are you most proud of?
I don't know.
I mean, you've had a really significant life in fishing. And I think your story with catching 260 permit out of a kayak and wading is phenomenal.
As much as I did it, though, I mean, it's nothing. I should have 500, 600, 700. You know, if I would have kept one, if Renee wouldn't have come into the picture, I'm glad she did because, you know, I just loved her to pieces, you know. If I would have kept at it the way I was the last 2 years that I fished, I got 30 and 33 per year, you know, and that's coming back here and sitting around for a while, waiting out the weather, you know, re-upping all my stores, you know, my water and my food and everything like that to go again, getting all the fuel together. Now I've got the sailboat, I've got the houseboat, I've got the whaler, and I've got the kayak and a trailer for the whaler. Now all this stuff takes registration fees and whatnot, and it's just, there's always something going on with one or the other or two at a time, you know, and I can't.
It's consuming.
Yeah, it's consuming.
Yeah.
How long do you have this place for?
Oh, we just rent this for the month.
I know, but.
We rent it every year for the whole month of May. Yeah. Last question. Did you ever speak with Del Brown about.
A little bit.
About his permit chasing days and yours as well? What kind of conversation?
He didn't talk much about that. All he ever told me is luck. And I'm agreeing with him. You know, it's just you fish enough and you're out there and that's what you're doing, you know, specifically, and you're not getting sidetracked. Steve Huff told me that he fired Del because Del wouldn't fish anything but permit. He told me that Del would be sitting on a cooler. Steve didn't have one of the casting towers up there, you know. said Dell would sit on that thing. He'd have to poke him with a push pole to wake him up, you know.
When he got older.
Yeah, when he got
Yeah.
my age or older. I don't know how old Dell was, but I got a picture of him. I took a picture when he got his 500th permit. I took a picture of him. He was with Dustin.
Right.
And that picture, I gave that picture to Dustin after I got him developed and everything, and told him, could you have Dell sign this for me? And he did. He put the J, you know, just luck.
Very cool.
The date of the thing, you know, the 500th fish.
That's pretty cool. Any advice to future permit fishermen out there?
Try the kayak.
There's a lot to be said for that. Nathaniel catches a lot of fish waiting because of the lack of pressure with the boat.
I wonder where he got that.
Yeah. Did you mentor Nathaniel a little bit?
No, I didn't. But Nathaniel has talked to people that watch me fish. People used to pull up outside, you know, by that patch reef off of Geiger and Boca Chica, and they'd just sit there, you know,
and watch you fish.
Yeah, they wanted to see bent rod or, you know, see splashes or something. I don't know.
Well, Jay, you got a fascinating story. Thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
It's great to meet you.
Yeah, very much so. You demand.
When I saw it's West Side Story. What I saw it's just a